You don't make up for your sins in the church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. The rest is bullshit, and you know it.
This is Daniela Taplin-Lundberg. I'm your host of the Hollywood Gold podcast. I'm here with my right hand, Rebecca Camarada, also my head of production at Stay Gold Features, our production company. Bex, how are you?
I am doing very well. How are you?
I'm so excited about our episode.
Very special guest. Do you want to tell us who this is?
We're about to hear the story of how Mean Streets got made, the movie that put Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro on the map. But I'm most excited about it, not only because it's one of my favorite films, but it was produced by my father, John Taplin, who has served as a bit of a icon for me, as you can imagine, through the years. And this story I grew up listening to over and over around the dinner table. I just loved how it all came together and how it could have been such an incredible disaster, but it wasn't. It became a legacy film and something he can be proud of till the day he dies. And actually, also, it still makes him money. So that is like a very rare situation for producers. So we're going to learn a lot about what to do and what not to do in making movies. This is my dad's first movie. He made a lot of mistakes, but he also helped make something great and bring to the industry one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And like, how incredible is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of a time when Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro were not
I know.
legends in the industry or household names. So I'm very, very excited to hear the story of this and to hear how your dad joined this project and got it made and launched the careers of two really, really incredible artists.
All right, let's get going. John Taplin, Dad, thank you for joining us. You're part of our inaugural podcast.
It's so cool to be here.
Not to get emotional here, but you inspired my path in life as a film producer. And I grew up listening to these incredible tales of making movies. And I thought being a producer is so difficult. And they're sort of the unsung heroes of filmmaking. Most people don't even know what producers do.
I'm amazed it didn't scare you away.
Well, it was the only thing I could be good at in filmmaking because I didn't think I was a very talented writer or actress or director, but I thought I could lead a troupe, which was what I always do doing. And so my favorite story was the story of how Mean Streets got made. And I kind of want you to take us back and start from the beginning. And when I say I want to hear the story, I really want to hear the minutia. I want to hear the nitty gritty. I want to hear the highs and lows and really kind of like wallow in it, in the memory and the highs and lows of it. And so if you could just sort of frame for us how you fell into producing, because I really do feel like you kind of fell into it and you realized you sort of had a talent for it because it utilized the same skills that maybe road managing and concert producing utilized. Right. So kind of frame it for us and then I'll prompt you with questions, but I really just hear the tale.
So I graduated from Princeton in '69 and I moved to Woodstock to work for the band and then for Bob Dylan and the band. And then we went to, in August of '69, we went to England to do something called the Isle of Wight, which was a big music festival with Bob and the band. And the night before the concert, this guy drove up to the manor house we were living in a beautiful car, and he said, the Beatles will be arriving in 15 minutes. And so he put this X helicopter landing mark out on the backyard. And just like in A Hard Day's Night, this helicopter landed and out jumped John, Ringo, and George and their wives. So
Not
we
Paul.
had not Paul. Paul was his wife had just had a baby and they were still in London.
Okay.
So we had a dinner and then they went out and the band rehearsed with Bob. And then there was some jamming with George and Ringo and John. And then they came to the concert and sat in the front row. And it was just, it was a dream. And when it was all over, George said, well, you want to come out and come and hang out? So he invited me to his house, which is called Friar Park, and I hung out with him. And so we began to have a kind of nice relationship. And so in 1971, he came to Woodstock. He had been working on his own album. The Beatles were breaking up.
Mm-hmm.
And Ravi Shankar had said, we need to get people to pay attention, and nobody is paying any attention. So George asked me to produce that concert for Bangladesh. And we did that, and it was very successful. When it was over, I realized that all the people I wanted to work with in the music didn't want to go on the road anymore. The band had stopped touring. Bob Dylan didn't want to tour. George didn't want to tour. Eric Clapton was too strung out to tour.
They were just burnt out. They'd just been doing it for too long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I briefly auditioned to do the Rolling Stones tour, but then I realized that Keith Richards was having the same problems that Eric Clapton was having. And the idea of trying to get a junkie on stage every night was just more than I could bear. So I thought maybe I'll go out to California and see if there's something else to do, maybe in the movie business. And a friend of mine named Jay Cox, who was a writer for Time magazine, said, well, look, when you go out there, look up a friend of mine. His name is Martin Scorsese, and he edited Woodstock, or he's one of the editors on Woodstock. And he's a huge music fan, and you guys will have a lot to talk about. So he gave me his number, and I went out and I rented a house in Laurel Canyon, and I called him one day and said, Jay Cox says should get together. So he came up to my house and he brought a script.
Now, Dad, did you know he was an aspiring filmmaker, or did you think he was an editor?
No, I thought he was an editor.
Okay.
In fact, at that point, he was editing a movie called Elvis on Tour. His specialty was doing music concert footage editing. That was what he was really good at.
And how old was he at that time?
He was about 26, I think.
Okay.
But it turns out he had actually just directed his first film for Roger Corman called Boxcar Bertha. I didn't know that, and the film had not come out. And it isn't a very Marty Scorsese film. It's a Roger Corman. It's like an exploitation film, right?
Right.
Anyway, he came up and he had this script called Season of the Witch. So I took it and he said, I can schedule a thing for you to see my student films at William Morris tomorrow.
And he was repped there.
He was repped by William Morris.
Okay.
And so I went down to William Morris and they screened a short called The Big Shave, another kind of longer short, which is about 18 minutes long, called It's Not Just You, Murray. Then his student feature at NYU, which is called Who's That Knocking at My Door, which stars Harvey Keitel. So the one I liked the best was called It's Not Just You, Murray, which is this kind of amazing, breaks the fourth wall. The gangster talks directly to the audience. It's got a musical number in it. It's really wild and crazy. And for some reason, I was so naive, I didn't realize you're not supposed to spend your own money on movies. Nobody told me about OPM, other people's money. So I'd made some money in rock and roll. I had some money from my inheritance from my grandfather. So I got a friend to put up $250 and I put up $250, and for $500,000, we just said, okay, we'll make this movie. It was so naive. I had no idea what the movie business was like.
And Dad, I want you to sort of set the scene, because independent filmmaking now, that's pretty common for independent money to be put into film. But at that time, it felt really unusual and rare.
It was totally unusual. There were some weird little, doctors and dentists would put money into a friend of their family and make some film that would never see the light of day. But the fact that you could make a movie independently, for one thing, there were no independent film distributors. There were only the majors.
Right.
There was nothing else. There was no Harvey Weinstein. There was no Searchlight. There were just the major studios. And so I didn't even think about the distribution side of it.
I guess that's my question. You were putting up all this money that you had worked for and was your entire inheritance. Did you even see the exit to the investment, or were you just like following your passion as a young guy?
I didn't think about the exit. I just assumed you make a movie, you'll get it out there somehow.
Yeah. And were Scorsese's agents kind of just leading you down the primrose path, or were they not even involved?
They weren't involved at all.
Okay.
You know, quite frankly, everybody on the movie got scale, including Marty.
Right.
There was Directors Guild scale. There was Actors Guild scale.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, none of the money went into the paying for the talent.
Right.
The money went into the crew. And so
back up a bit. Were you just like, all right, let's go make this. This script is fully formed. I have no thoughts. I have no notes. I trust you from student film. And then what did you do? Did you figure out that you had to hire a line producer? Like, how did you launch the ship?
I figured I had to get a line producer, and Marty had a guy named Paul Rapp who had done Boxcar Bertha. So he was like a production manager.
Okay.
So we hired him, and Corman did all his films non-union. There was a kind of non-union group of people that you could hire, but this was a movie set in New York. So first we had to go to New York, but the idea was we could never afford to shoot it in New York. And the unions, especially the Teamsters in New York, were much more powerful than in LA. In LA, you could kind of evade them. Yeah. But in New York, it was a smaller physical place. And if truck drivers saw film trucks there, they would just come down on like a ton of bricks. So we had to pretend we were an NYU student film. Now, Marty had been at NYU, and so he found an NYU student to be like the production manager. In New York. He could pull out his student ID if anyone came around.
Brilliant.
We had a little crew, and we just shot for like 8 days on Mott Street, you know, down in the place where Marty grew up.
So you did shoot a bulk of the film in New York. That was
all
always been under
all
dispute.
those exteriors that are we shot in New York at the beginning, and you know, and so the great thing was that Marty had wanted to make this movie for so long that he had drawn out in these little storyboard books every single shot, literally every camera move, every tracking shot, everything. He'd drawn it out. So he could say, okay, I'm going to take this shot, and this shot, and shoot them in New York, and I'll shoot this next shot in LA. And so he had thought it out brilliantly.
Johnny! It's me, Charlie! Hey, watch this. I'm going to shoot the light on the Empire State Building. Hey, cut it out, stupid. It's me!
I know Keitel was more of a known entity when you were casting, or maybe he wasn't.
No.
I mean, talk about that whole process.
Okay, so Harvey had done Marty's student film, but really nothing other than that. But Marty trusted Harvey, and Harvey had played the Marty character because it's obviously Marty's kind of autobiographical story. So he'd played that same character in Who's That Knocking? Okay. So Marty said, okay, Harvey will be that guy. And then Brian De Palma, who was a friend of Marty's, was a New York filmmaker, had made 2 little films with Bob De Niro. And they hadn't really gotten seen outside of New York. But, you know, he said, this guy is really good. And so Marty met him and just said, okay, I think he's the right guy. So then the other 3 main characters, we went to an acting workshop that John Voight was running. And this was John Voight before he turned into a right-wing crazy. At that time, he was a Hollywood liberal, right? He was anti-war. He had done a movie with Jane Fonda, and he had an acting workshop that he ran.
Mm-hmm.
And in that workshop was David Proval, Richard Romanus, and Amy Robinson. They were all in that workshop. And we went one night just to watch people doing improvs and stuff like that. And out of that, Marty talked to Voight, and Voight said, yeah, these are the best people I have. And Proval and Romanus both looked kind of Italian anyway. And Amy had dark hair, and so that could do as well. And so we just cast them,
So that was the casting process? Was like there a formal casting process that you had people come in and reading?
There was no casting director at all. I mean, there was somebody who got us the kind of smaller roles. Like Cesare De Nova, who plays the kind of Don. But he was just like a TV actor that could play Italian American, right?
Right.
Other than that, there were just people that Marty knew.
Right.
It was completely informal.
And for you, were you just like, this is like the next chapter of rock and roll? Like we're going down the path and we'll find this person and pick them up and they'll show up for work, maybe.
I mean, I had this weird notion that I'd produced like 120 concerts in 3 years, right?
Right.
And I thought, well, when you produce a concert, if something goes wrong technically, you're really screwed.
Right.
Because there's 10,000 people clapping and trying to get the thing to start. But in movies, if something goes wrong, you'll come back tomorrow and do it. So it seemed a little more forgiving. That was pretty naive too,
And then crewing up, were they department heads that Scorsese had known in New York, or what was the process?
No, this guy, Paul Rapp, who was the production manager, knew a good prop master, knew a good electrician. The cinematographer, Kurt Wakefield, was an advertising cameraman who was willing to take scale wages in order to get to do a feature. Quite frankly, all of the ideas of the lighting and everything is Marty. I mean, that scene where De Niro comes into the bar the first time and it's all red and it's slow motion. Marty had thought that shot out completely beforehand, and he was the one who said, okay, just blow as much red light into this and red gels everywhere. And so, I mean, he's the one who kind of thought of how it should look.
So Marty is so equipped and prepared. So like there's a lot of confidence in that. Did you guys get along very well in prep? I mean, was he just so grateful or what was the process?
Yeah, we got along pretty well. I mean, look, in any given time, the process has tensions just because you only have 27 days to shoot. And it's not like Roger Corman, who had a company where if you went another day, there was more money that could be found.
Right.
There was no more money.
Right.
Quite frankly, the film cost more than $500,000, partially because the music rights were more than that, right? But we kind of faked that. We got the licenses for the music, but we didn't pay for them until after we got a distribution deal.
So did Warner Brothers end up paying the license fees?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't like it came out of our pocket.
So I want to get to that because that's such a great part of the story. And to me, like what is so imprinted on my memory. So you're shooting 8 days in New York. The rest of the film is being shot in LA. You have built the sets. What do you remember about the actual shooting of the film?
I remember it was very fast. I mean, he never did more than 2 takes on anything or 3 max. And he was doing like 30 setups a day. I mean, it was moving. It was moving. In terms of the shoot, we had this one Winnebago for everybody.
That was holding for the cast. So that's where everyone hung
but also
out.
for the production office too. I mean, so Amy Robinson had to change clothes. She had to go into the little tiny bathroom. That's how lean
Love
it
it.
was. There was a certain tension between Richard Romanus, who plays the loan shark, who's always trying to collect from
Yeah.
Johnny Boy,
Yeah.
between him and De Niro, because Bobby somehow felt if he stayed in character, the intimidation factor on Romanus would be really present. And it worked like crazy. I mean, Richard kept trying to be friends off
Right.
camera.
Right.
And De Niro would never let him in. He
Right.
was gonna be in character. He was gonna be this hard ass all the time. And, he's very kind of quiet. He's not a huggy type of guy,
Right.
He wasn't gonna really come out of the character that much.
And warm up to the
Right.
crew. So
You
was De Niro a highly trained actor? That feels very
felt that
method
way.
to me. Yeah.
It felt that way.
Yeah.
I think he studied with Stella Adler, and he had clearly studied his craft. And I think he'd read a lot about Marlon Brando.
Right.
And to me, that was clearly the model. I mean, in the sense that I think he was the kind of young Brando in a way.
Right. And so Scorsese and De Niro, those are the guys who shot out of a cannon after the film.
Right.
Were you sort of aware of that as soon as he arrived on set? I mean, not that you could have predicted what was going to happen, but what was your feeling about the cast coming in?
There's a scene really early on in the film where he comes into the bar. The Romanus character, the loan shark, tries to confront him. Harvey takes them into the back room. Then there's this confrontation. And Bobby took it to such a level, and you just knew this guy is about to explode. And it was so palpable. It was so clearly real, authentic, and so hot that you knew right away he was really something. And, Marty took a rough cut up to show to Francis Coppola, and Francis was just blown away and immediately told Paramount that he wanted to cast De Niro in Godfather 2. I mean, literally the next day.
Yeah. That's incredible.
And it was like, oh my God, this guy is incredible. And then he called Bernardo Bertolucci and told him about De Niro. And Bernardo was trying to cast 1900. And Bernardo somehow flew over to meet Bobby, and somehow he got to see some of the film. And he was like, okay, he's in, right? So Bobby got these two astonishing roles before the movie ever came out.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
Yeah.
What was the rapport between Scorsese and De Niro? Was it immediately like, we are our collaborators for life?
Yeah, I think so. Marty knew exactly who these characters were, probably more than Bobby did. In other words, Bob was from Greenwich Village, but his father was an artist. So he wasn't from the neighborhood, so to speak. He did not hang out with, the kids in the neighborhood the way Marty had. He hung out with the artists in Greenwich Village, not the Italian American kids on Mott Street.
Right.
So I think Marty taught him how that code of honor and the code of who you respect and what you do and you don't do. And of course, the Johnny Boy character does all the wrong things, in terms of not respecting the right person, but he had to understand what the code was in order to break it as part of the character. And Marty had all that information.
And you said that Marty does 2 takes tops. So was there an incredible amount of rehearsal, or
he would rehearse every scene for camera blocking and everything a couple of times, and then he'd roll camera. But, there was this ticking clock kind of thing. Now, he had worked with Corman, and I think he'd shot Boxcar Bertha in 30 days too. So he understood that time pressure that indie films had to live under in those days.
So it wasn't like you were like, Marty, we got to shut this off. He understood the pressure of the budget that you had. And
totally. And by the way, if you had to finish a set and get out of that set and move on to the next day, and he had 5 shots left and he only had time for 2, he'd know which 3 to let go.
Right. He would know how to adjust,
Yeah.
which I'm always like so impressed with.
That's why, people who are editors,
Right.
I think often make great directors because they
Right.
understand, okay, I can see how to cut this scene without that one shot.
They understand what's essential.
Yeah.
And it's always so impressive to me. I'm curious what Marty is like as a director. It's always so interesting as a producer producing multiple movies to realize that your director doesn't see how any other director works. They only know how they work. And there's so many different approaches to directing cast, to interacting with crew, to interacting with your DP. And some directors I find like allow it to happen, and some are so specific in their direction. And so I'm curious at that time of his career, what kind of director, what were your observations?
I think he was more willing to let a certain kind of improvisation go on, in the sense that De Niro did some stuff that weren't in the script. And there were scenes that weren't in the script. I mean, that whole scene in the pool room, who's a mook? That was pretty much improvised.
I'm a mook, yeah. What's a mook?
A mook? What's a mook?
I don't know.
What's a mook?
You can't call me a mook.
I can't?
No.
So you got through the shoot, and then you see a cut of the film, Coppola's flipping for it. What do you do then?
While he was assembling the rough cut, Marty had put all this music on it, literally from his record collection, with no notion of what it would cost to get that music. But it was clear he wasn't going to have someone score it.
It was all needle drops. It was all music that already existed.
Right. So we see the rough cut, and he says, this is the music I want to be in this movie. And it included Jumping Jack Flash from the Rolling Stones, right? So I said, okay, well, we certainly haven't budgeted for that.
Right.
But I said, look, if I kind of slow walk licensing this stuff, maybe we can get the licenses but not sign them. And then we will know we have the music if we want it. And if we sell the film, then we can pay for it.
Dad, did you, at that time, I mean, you had such a history in music. I'm curious what your perspective was. I mean, I feel like maybe part of you was like, I know how expensive these cues are going to be, but maybe another part of you was like, I have relationships. I can probably figure out a way to massage this.
It was more the latter.
Yeah.
In other words, first off, nobody had used needle drops before Mean Streets and American Graffiti.
Oh, wow.
Nobody. That was just not what you did. You had some guy come in and write a score. I mean, maybe in Blackboard Jungle in the 1950s, because it was a rock and roll movie, there was some needle drops. But nobody had used that wall to wall as if it was coming off a radio. And you didn't even pretend like it was coming off a radio. It was just the song. Okay.
Right.
So in that sense, licensing a Shirelles tune or something else, a doo-wop tune from the 50s, was not very expensive. It turned out to be like $500, right? I mean, now these are really expensive because everybody understands like there's a lot of money to be made, but it wasn't very expensive. But the Rolling Stones was a problem. But fortunately, I had just worked with Alan Klein, who was the Rolling Stones manager, but he was also the Beatles manager. And I had done the concert for Bangladesh with him. So I called him up and I said, I really wanted to get this, and I need you to do me a deal, like a low-priced license for this. And he said, okay, I'll do it for you, but if I don't like the movie, I have the right to take it out.
Oh, my God. Which is so unusual. That would never happen today.
Right.
I mean, either you agree or you don't, but that's not
right.
Yeah.
But he knew he was doing me a favor.
Right.
And I knew he had no taste when it came to movies. But I just figured somehow we'd get past that. You know, if I had to go over his head and appeal to Mick or something, I would do that because I had a relationship with Jagger. So he gave us that right. And of course, that to me is one of the seminal moments in 100%. The movie. Mm-hmm. And it's so iconic, and it sets De Niro's character up like this guy is wild. You cannot be sure of what he's going to do at any given time. And that music is so perfect to that. And the slow motion walking into the bar and everything, it's just, you're there. You understand.
No, that's the moment you realize you're dealing with a real filmmaker.
Right.
And I will say that growing up with you has informed that for me as a producer, that music to film is everything. It can make or break a film. It sets the tone for everything. And that you absolutely did for that film.
Yeah.
This sequence of events always sort of confuses me and eludes me. And maybe you can just like take us through the timeline, because I know you went to the New York Film Festival. You also went to the Cannes Film Festival. It feels like maybe you went to the New York Film Festival first, but maybe I'm confused.
Yeah.
And did you have distribution? Like, explain that whole sequence of events.
Okay, so first we had to get distribution, right?
Yeah.
So we had a print that we made, and I got the lab to make a print without us having to pay for it, a work
That's
print.
Great producing.
With the idea that if we got distribution, they would get to make the prints. Then I had a lawyer named Norman Gary, who was also Francis Coppola's lawyer. So he was a well-known guy in Hollywood. Anyway, so Norman arranged 4 screenings in 2 days. And that was going to be it, make or break. If none of those studios bought it, you were over. And I hadn't even really focused on this until the first screening.
Were those the only 4 studios that were sort of viable, or were there a couple others and weren't interested?
Well, MGM was just kind of hanging on, was not really a viable studio.
Yep.
And for some reason, Columbia Pictures must have told him that they weren't interested in even seeing it. So we go first to Universal, and we're in this big Alfred Hitchcock theater on the lot.
Yep.
Marty and I each taking 1 film can, it's in 2 cans, and we bring it to the thing, and the projection sets it up, and we go into the theater, and the one executive, Peter Safir, is there, and he greets us, and we sit down to watch it.
So it's one guy watching it.
One guy.
Okay.
The film finishes, and he gets up and he says, well, this is not for us. I don't know if this is like a major studio movie. Like, what was going to be the choice? It wasn't anything but major studios, right?
Yeah.
We might have been able to release it through Roger Corman, but he would have given us like $10,000 against our $500,000 expense.
Right.
And so it was at that point that all of a sudden it occurred to me, oh my God, I might lose everything. And for some reason, it hadn't occurred to me to that point. I don't know if I was just like blocking it out or overconfident or whatever. But the fact that this guy didn't like the movie, and Francis Coppola had said it's brilliant, and all our friends had loved it, So then we go over, we take like 2 sad sack salesmen, we take our 2 film cans, and we drive over to Warner Brothers at lunchtime. And this is in a tiny little screening room behind the main executive thing. And we sit down, and 3 people come in. One is a guy named John Calley, who was the president of Warner Brothers at the time. And one was a guy named Dick Lederer, who was the head of advertising. And one was Leo Greenfield, who was the head of sales. So they were the 3 decision makers, right? And so they sit down, and the movie starts. And literally 10 minutes into this movie, this waiter comes into the room, and it's a tiny screening room. So he's being projected on the screen while he's handing out sandwiches to everybody. And Marty is just like dying. And finally, the waiter leaves, and it kind of settles down. And Callie is way up front, and they're beginning to laugh. And I'm beginning to feel, oh, okay, these guys get it. And Callie was a New York Catholic guy. So I think he understood some of the humor of it. And Norman had said to me, look, these guys don't have a lot of time. And if they don't like it, they may just walk out in the middle of the movie.
Right.
And so around 2/3 of the way through, John Callie gets up and starts walking backward. And I thought, oh, hell, we're screwed. And he comes and he sits down next to me. And he says, look, this is the best movie I've seen all year, but I have to take a leak. Would you mind stopping it? I said, sure. What button do I push? So we stopped it. He went, came back, the movie finished, and he just got up. And this is what Hollywood was like in those days. He said, we're buying it, and you're not selling this to anybody else. He didn't even consult with his two guys.
Right,
He just said, we're buying this.
Oh my God. It's like the Wild West. I freaking love it.
Yeah. So he literally went upstairs. He called Frank Wells into his office, who was the head of business affairs, and said, call Norman Gary and buy this film, whatever they want, and
did he really say whatever they want?
I don't know what he said, but we got another 100,000 above what we paid for it. Plus
Fantastic.
We got paid for the thing. So then we go over to Paramount that afternoon, and we go into a screening with a guy named Peter Bart. The movie starts playing, and literally 25 minutes into it, he gets up and walks out, says, this is not a Paramount movie.
Oh my God.
And leaves. But we knew Marty had already taken the Valium, and we were fine. We knew we had the sale, right? So then we take it to the New York Film Festival.
Did you even go to the fourth studio?
No, we're done.
Okay.
So then that fall, we go to the New York Film Festival. So
what month did you sell this? What year, what month?
We would have sold it in July.
Okay.
July 73. So the New York Film Festival was in late September of 73.
Yes.
So we go to the New York Film Festival, and just before the festival, Pauline Kael's review comes out. And it's like 8 pages long in the New Yorker. And it's
it was in the New Yorker.
Yeah, that's who she was reviewing for in those days. And she basically said, this is what the new American cinema is all about. And it was just like one of the, in your whole life, you will die for a review like that.
Right.
And then that kind of set the tone. Vincent Canby of the New York Times liked it. It got really good reviews. And it opened right after the festival at the Cinema One, which was this theater on, I think, 3rd Avenue.
Yeah.
But it was like the cool theater to be in on the Upper East Side.
Warner Brothers opened it right after the festival.
Yeah.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
And was it like 2 theaters? Was it 10 theaters? Was it 100 theaters?
It was first just New York.
Okay.
It sold out every show for days and days. It was really good. And then it opened in Chicago, Los Angeles, 1 theater in each city, Philadelphia, Boston, the 10 markets or something.
Yeah. It's called a platform release.
Yeah.
Right?
And it did well, but not as well as it had done in New York, right?
Yeah.
I mean, New York, I think it broke some kind of record for a weekend or something, for 1 theater.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, Warner's came out with this movie called The Exorcist.
Oh my God.
And The Exorcist went through the roof. I mean, it was like, it became a world phenomena. And they opened it at like 600 theaters, which in those days was gigantic.
Right.
And all of a sudden, Mean Streets was doing, $25,000 a week or something in a theater. Yeah. And The Exorcist was doing hundreds of thousands. And I couldn't get them to pay much attention to it.
Oh my God.
So, it played out over time. And then.
But in those days, the movies would just sit in the theaters, right?
Oh,
It wasn't like
it stayed at the Cinema One for like 8 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And I think it stayed in a lot of cities for quite a while, but only in one theater, right? It was like an art house release. So I realized they weren't taking it very seriously. So I said, can I buy the European rights? Because we had gotten accepted in like December for the Cannes Film Festival.
Okay, cool.
And the Cannes Film Festival was going to be in May of 74.
And like the dramatic competition or like Director's Fortnight? Do you remember
Director's Fortnight.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, maybe this is like an Italian movie. Maybe it'll do well in Europe. And they were at this point, oh, fine. What do you want? And so I said, I'll write you a check for $100,000 to buy the rights for Europe.
Cool.
And they said,
Loving
fine.
this. Yeah.
And so I bought it, personally bought back the rights to Europe.
Yeah.
And they had no back end. They had nothing. It was a total buyout
Outright.
of European
Oh my God.
rights.
Genius.
Forever.
Genius.
Then we went to Cannes in May. My friend Jay Cox, who I told you about, who was the one who introduced me to Marty, was the movie reviewer for Time magazine. He sets us up with an introduction to Federico Fellini.
Oh, geez.
Fellini is in this huge suite in the Carlton Hotel in Cannes. And Marty and I are ushered in with Jay to meet the maestro, right? And Fellini is so great. He's like very warm and affectionate. And Jay had told him a lot about the movie beforehand and how Marty was going to be the next important young American New Wave director, right?
Yeah.
So about 35 minutes into this thing, the door opens and in comes Giulietta Messina, who's his wife, who had been in La Strada, who was for us this incredible presence. And behind her, carrying all these Chanel and Gucci huge bags, was this guy who turned out to be Fellini's distributor in Italy. Federico, oh my God, she's spending all my money in the closet and everything. It goes through this whole thing. And then finally they put down all the bags and we're introduced to the distributor of this company called Titanus. And Fellini says, you need to buy this film today. It's brilliant. Tomorrow it's going to screen in the Director's Fortnight and you're going to be screwed because everyone's going to want it. And you have to buy it today.
And Fellini hasn't seen it.
He hadn't seen it.
Okay.
He told him he had. He said, this movie is so brilliant. It just went on and on and on.
Oh my God.
And it was so perfect. So the guy said, okay, where do I sign? I literally made a contract that afternoon and we signed. And
so did he pay you upfront money for it?
Yeah, he paid us $75,000.
No. And how long was the license for?
5 years.
Oh my God. Dad, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So I had recovered 3/4 of my investment with one.
That's what I love to hear. I love to hear.
And then we sold it to Gaumont. We sold it to everybody. Fellini was right in the sense that the screening went very well. The European critics were effusive, and we sold it to every territory.
What's the matter with you?
What's the matter with you?
After that, did De Niro and Scorsese just shoot into a different stratosphere? And sort of Keitel as well, but like what was their trajectory after Cannes? Was it very obvious or was it just like the studios started to take notice or?
It took a little while. Marty went and did the film with Ellen Burstyn, which was semi-successful, but not really successful.
It's not Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore, is it?
Yeah. And then they did Taxi Driver, and Taxi Driver caused a big stir. And that's when they really became bonded as a pair. Marty never had an easy movie to get done. Even Taxi Driver, they didn't have that big a budget. He then made New York, New York, which was his first big budget movie. And that was Bobby and Liza Minnelli.
Right.
And then in the middle of that, we started making The Last Waltz together. And
Right.
that was a whole other story.
That's a whole other story, which we'll tell.
Yeah.
Because that's its own kind of crazy story.
Oh, very crazy.
So this is sort of a bigger question, which I'm sure you've been asked a little bit as you publish your memoir. What was the impact of Mean Streets on your life? I mean, obviously it was to me, it was such a huge risk, but it is such a legacy film. It's something that did impact cinema forever. It's something you can be so proud of in terms of taking a risk on something no one else would have at that time.
Yeah, I think the lesson learned from it was that you can take risks, and it's more important to do something that you feel passionate about than something that you kind of have a calculation will make a lot of money. I was never able to make that calculation. Maybe I didn't really understand the kind of Marvel popular taste thing. I mean, those are not my movies. So I had been brought up in this kind of neorealism tradition of the movies that I saw when I was in college were French movies and Italian movies and Swedish movies. And, that was the cinema that I was in love with. I was not in love with Rock Hudson and Doris Day. So for me, it was just, I haven't made half as many movies as you've made. And I just made a few of them. And I would say 80% of them are pretty good.
Yeah.
And most of them have the same kind of quirky, personal feel to them. And they're very director oriented. So that kind of became what I did right. And when I didn't do that, it was a mistake, I got into a place where I was kind of a hero at Walt Disney, and I made a movie just because they gave me a movie to make. And it wasn't my movie at all. And that was a mistake. So I had to learn that really the key thing was to find something that you're really passionate about that you think is a little different.
We as producers often get the short end of the stick, meaning we sort of create these opportunities for filmmakers to show their talents. And then the filmmakers go on to greatness, and we're sort of left to start at the beginning with another film or another filmmaker. And I always say this to people, that making a film is like being the CEO of a company. We've got to launch the ship and hire the crew and oversee the budgets and oversee the creative. And it's really every movie is like its own company. And when I contextualize that for people, they're like, what? That sounds crazy to do over and over and over again. Do you ever have resentment about that?
Not so much, because I did a second movie with Marty, and that was much more fraught with disputes and problems. That was a movie I had to be a cop, and I didn't like playing that role.
Right.
And especially when the two people that were the creators of the movie they wanted to do what they wanted to do, and there was nothing I could do about it. I had to let it go. I don't know. I don't really have many regrets. I think part of the key thing about being a producer is being able to go to the next thing, even if it doesn't work out exactly the way you hoped it would be. And you can't hold on to people. And you also have to be around people that you really want to be around, who make you feel good. And
that's right.
It's not a struggle.
Words to live by, Dad. I think that was so incredible to me to hear the risks you took at a time when no one was taking risks like that. It's not like there was like an industry of, we're all just raising independent money and doing this, and there's a market for it, and we'll go to this festival and we'll sell it or we won't.
Right.
But at that time, it was just like, it really was the Wild West. And so you really were a pioneer.
There was no Sundance.
We'll have to tell your Sundance story when Harvey Weinstein strangled you.
Yes.
But maybe, Dad, maybe we just tell that story as a little teaser because it's like the best story ever.
So in 96, I was running a company called Pandora, which was a French company that financed and did foreign distribution. And I was running the American side of it. And we had financed a movie called Shine, which was about a kind of autistic piano player with maybe a middle-aged Australian named Scott Hicks. We'd pre-sold the British territory, but that was it. And Australia, because the Australian Film Commission put some money into it.
Who's the star of the film?
Jeffrey Rush.
Jeffrey Rush, yeah.
We were out about $1.5 million, and we were going to take it to Sundance, and we got in Sundance. The week before Sundance, the guy who ran the Paris office, Ernst Goldschmidt, asked me to show it to Miramax, to a guy named Tony Stafford, who was the acquisitions guy at Miramax. So I had a screening for him of the movie, and when the movie was over, he just walked out and he didn't say anything. And I didn't hear anything from him the next 2 days. And so I figured it was a pass. And so we went to Sundance and we screened it on the first night of the festival in that big theater on Main Street.
Oh, no, you were on the Main Street. Okay.
And when the screening was over, I realized that it had really worked. And everybody, Ruth Vitale, Fine Line, Searchlight, by this time there were lots of indie distributors. Mini majors. And they all came up and said they were interested in buying it. So I had a condo, and the next morning I started just taking the calls, right? And we had no agent, we had nothing. It was just me. So by around 2 p.m, we'd gotten it up to about $2.5 million or $3 million for US rights only.
Which at that time was extraordinary.
Yeah. And Fine Line literally moved into my condo. They were determined they were not going to lose another movie to Miramax. And they brought a computer and a printer and everything and literally printed out the contract right there. And me and Scott Hicks was in there. And around 4 p.m, literally as we're about to sign, this guy, Tony Stafford, calls and says, Harvey is on a private jet. He's going to land in 25 minutes at the Sundance airport, and he wants to buy the film. I said, well, it's too late. We've already sold it to Fine Line. He said, you can't do that. I said, you had your shot. You could have taken off the market a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. He said, he's going to be really pissed off if you do this. And I said, I don't care, And so Scott Hicks, the director, had been made to wait in Harvey's waiting room while he was trying to get it financed for 8 hours and then never had a meeting with him. So he had a real hard-on against Harvey. And anyway, so we signed the deal with Fine Line and we go out to the Mercato Italian restaurant with some friends, Deb Newmeyer and Linda Lichter and Carlos Goodman and some lawyers and people who are the lawyer of the director and everything. And we're having this really nice meal. And all of a sudden I see Harvey Weinstein marching towards me. And he's over the table and he said, you fucked me, you screwed me. I can't believe you did this. So Deb Newmeyer said, and Deb Newmeyer was Steven Spielberg's story editor and was married to Bobby Newmeyer, who had done Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which was the film that had made Harvey.
Yeah.
And so she says to him, Harvey, for once in your life, why don't you take the high road and congratulate John? And he turns to her and he said, shut the fuck up, bitch. and then Linda Lichter gets up and says, apologize to her. And he said, screw you. And he grabs me by the collar and literally hauls me off into the corner. And he says, I'm going to cut you a new asshole. You'll never work in this town again. I'm calling Ernst. He's going to back out of this contract. I said, it's already signed. He'll back me up. Forget about it. And he said, you're dead. You're fucking dead. And I like wave to the head waiter who's hovering, and he brings over two like burly busboys who are like ski patrol types. And they literally grab Harvey by either arm and like kind of frog walk him out of the room, And so Meryl Poster, who worked for Harvey, was hovering in the corner watching this whole thing go on. And evidently they went downstairs and she said, you just called Steven Spielberg's story editor a bitch. And he said, who was that? And so he wrote her an apology letter, her, not me, Deb Newmeyer, and had Meryl Poster hand carry it up and hand it to her. So we finished our dinner and, I didn't think anything more of it. But it turns out that there was a reporter from Variety and had just witnessed the whole thing. And then the next morning in both papers, this thing was like front page of this confrontation. And Ernst called me like at 7 a.m. and he said, well, I've already had 2 bids for like $6 million for the foreign rights.
It was like the best marketing campaign ever.
We had figured we'd be lucky if we get $2 million for foreign and $1 million for domestic, and we'd be fine, right? And at the end of the day, I think Disney ended up paying $8 million for the foreign rights. Right?
Oh my God, Dad! And there was a likeness of both you and Harvey on the cover of Variety, as I remember it.
It was actually the Hollywood Reporter.
I was
a cartoon.
Yeah, cartoon.
Yeah.
I think I was in high school at the time.
Yeah.
But that definitely made a mark. So crazy. And subsequently, every time there was an article on Harvey, someone would call you and he would somehow find you, is my memory, and just say, John, now, what are you going to say?
Yes.
Right? Always trying to
I knew he was a bully long before most people knew he was a bully, but I didn't know anything about the way he treated women, but at the time. But anyway,
Dad, I love you so much. This was so fun. This was so fun. This is probably the longest we've talked.
Yeah, it's great
in years. It's so cool. So thanks, Dad. Love you so much.
Love you too. Bye.
Bex, that was a great episode, don't you think?
I agree, and it was so fun for me because now I see where you get it from.
Well, it's such a wild ride, and first and foremost, I just want to say I think my dad's sort of attraction to risk is the reason that I produce in the way that I do. As you know, we make a lot of independent films. We put a lot of money out on the table for movies that don't seem so obvious, and we kind of dive headlong into things, and it actually has really served us well. I think we've had a lot of success because we take risks on things that maybe other people wouldn't. And in listening to my dad's story, I sort of was reminded of where I think I might get that instinct.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stood out the most to me was how much initiative he took and how many risks he took, from just cold calling up Martin Scorsese when he got to LA.
Yeah.
And then risking all of his own money on producing this movie. And then just continued to take risks. Even then when after that he found out, I might lose all of my money.
Yeah.
Even then he bought the foreign rights to the movie. Like, he just constantly took risks throughout the whole process. And that is something that you do as a producer. You really produce films that other people might not feel comfortable producing because they are too risky.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the biggest things that I took away from this too, is that seeing that your dad did that in his very, very first film project, and how that inspired you to take risks. But then on the flip side of that is he said something at the end about you should only make stories you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And that's something that you also do. So I think for both him and you, the risks don't feel like so much of a risk when you really believe in the movie.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've seen throughout your career, that you only take the risk, and you're willing to take the risk, but you only do it if you're fully passionate about it, if you can fully give yourself to the project. And that's pretty incredible.
I love you so much. You're the best. I totally agree. And the thing though that really struck me is that, I consider myself a sort of seasoned producer now, and I sort of understand the market and what people are going to want to see, or at least, in some way. And the thing that struck me about my father producing that movie is he had no idea what he was doing. I mean, he had never produced a film. I mean, it's like, in what world? But I guess on the other hand, that was just what he had done his whole career, with music and becoming a concert producer and just sort of diving headlong into things that excited him and that he felt passionate about, which, ultimately was music and film. So I think you're right. I can't believe he did what he did. I guess if the movie hadn't been any good, we wouldn't be talking about it today. So the fact that he dove into something that was really, launched these careers is pretty amazing. He had good instincts.
Well, and to be honest, I don't think this movie would have been made unless your dad took a chance on it. I think Scorsese was really unknown. He had done a couple of shorts, was fresh out of film school, and even the completed film, when they were trying to sell it, which I loved the story of them. Your dad's was like, they were like two sad sex salesmen just like walking around with the reels from studio to studio trying to sell it.
It's amazing.
So funny. But even then, most people didn't get it.
Right.
And so the fact that, the one guy was like, yes,
yeah,
this is the movie, and took a chance on it, I really don't think anyone was going to have made this movie, because indie movies really weren't a thing at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't think a studio would have understood this or would have taken the risk that your dad took on it. So, I mean, it's a bold statement, but we might have your dad to thank for Martin Scorsese being...
I know. And also just this whole world of independent film. I mean, it really was many years later when, Sex, Lies, and Videotape and independent film started to have a market again. But you're right. There was just no real independent money going into smaller films. That just wasn't the way it was done. It was either the studio or maybe you made a movie at your house and no one ever saw it. But there was no sort of in between. So that is pretty incredible.
Was there anything in this, I know you said you've heard this story many times, but was there anything in this particular telling of it that really surprised you or that you hadn't heard before?
The story I hadn't heard was the fact that Coppola saw an early cut of Mean Streets, and that's how he got his eye on De Niro.
Wow.
And then Bertolucci heard about it as well, and that's how Bertolucci cast De Niro as well. So I just love that idea that all these brilliant directors are sort of in each other's corners and showing each other, it's like Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas, they're all buddies and just showing each other, the new young talents. And I just thought that was so cool. So I hadn't heard that, and I thought, wow, Scorsese has De Niro to thank for his career.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. I mean, he was probably going to do all right on his own anyways, but...
Right, yeah.
But really, really incredible.
Very, very interesting.
Bex, this has been so fun. Thanks for doing this with me. I can't wait till next week. We'll see what next week brings. Please DM us at Stakeled Features with any questions you have and also movies you want to hear about. If we can figure out a way to connect with those producers, we will definitely do deep dives into all great films big and small. And so thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.